Wednesday night sessions. I am, as usual, your host, Mitch Nobis, coming to you from the basement office, the decoration low light of your viewing year, I am sure. Joining us tonight is Robert James Russell, an editor and writer and former Michigander. So as many regular viewers know, this show will often focus on Michigan-based writers, but not always. And given everything is online these days, my favorites are kind of these expats who we can't bring back in person, but now we can bring them back in. So I'll throw it over to Robert James Russell to introduce himself and give us a reading of his work. And then, like always, a couple of questions at the end. So take it away, Rob.
Thank you, Mitch. Hello, everyone. And I don't like to consider myself a former Michigander. I'm an always Michigander, even if I'm not living there. But great to be here. Thank you. My name is Robert James Russell. I am the founding editor of two literary journals, Midwestern Gothic and Cheap Pop. I have written a few books, novellas, Mazia and Sea of Trees, and then a chapbook called Don't Ask Me to Spell It Out. I currently live in Lincoln, Nebraska. My heart is very Midwest shaped in that way. Can't seem to escape it. Tonight I am going to commit a cardinal sin, two cardinal sins, I think actually. I am going to read from a work in progress, and I'm going to read the opening of a work in progress. This is a book called Believers. It is about a woman named Libby Hoy, H-O-Y, who had, in 1983, her and her mother were attacked by a Manson-like cult, these women from this Manson-like cult led by this man named Clifford. And the book sort of deals with the lifelong ramifications of something like that. What happens to someone like that? And it's all about sort of Libby's journey over the next 30 years of her life, how she unpacks this horrible trauma, how she tries to get away from it, how she's constantly pulled back to it, how she tries to find answers and fill in the blanks of things that have happened to her in her life since that night. Just when she thinks she's able to sort of free herself from it, she's pulled right back into it. And really this sort of idea of how can one free themselves, can they really ever free themselves from it, and what that journey sort of looks like. So I'm going to be reading from the opening of this. I think that's it. Roebuck, Indiana, August 1983. And I forgot to mention that this is all set in a fictional town in northwestern Indiana called Roebuck, right along Lake Michigan. Here's what she knows about that night. The girls turned up in the then unincorporated town of Roebuck in Comana County just after sticky dusk, just after the black flies and mosquitoes had quieted and returned to their hide holes, as the waxing crescent moon, that black dim orb only just slivered silver like a box cutter had freed it from its colliginous packaging, had reared itself in the unremitting evening sky. They were driving a stolen 75 bone white Cortina, stolen from a swell named trailer park in Kokomo, headed right for their house. They'd been traveling slowly through backcountry roads so as not to draw attention, wearing matching large oval sunglasses they'd stolen from a gas station down in Gnawbone, their hair in braids that belied their age, simultaneously children and 20-somethings who'd lived quiet, hard lives. They paraded themselves as sisters, although had only known each other less than a year. But they liked the attention it drew. Their general chumminess, how they hung and clung to one another, tickled and poked, drew stares from men and women both. Here, though, they drove in mostly silence, brows furrowed in antagonizing impatience and mouths twisted crookedly up, imagining what it'd all be like after the fact, when they'd all be together again. They were young, these girls. Bethany Grofsner had turned 17 back in May, and Tara DeGray 18 a month later, almost to the date. But neither celebrated their birthdays nor revisited the sorrow they'd left behind, running away from their families in the deepest night, or their mark of terror on the state of Indiana thus far, a road trip of brutality that left countless dead in their wake. Clifford, had given them instructions clear as day since they'd come to live with him. Never look back, always forward. It was all, he'd say while he undressed, their eyes wrapped on his sinewy body, hungry for it. about where we go from here, what's awaiting us after this great work of ours. He especially eschewed birthdays as meaningless frivolities, and the girls didn't put up much of a fight. They didn't fight about much. See, neither would have said their homes were broken, as was the prevailing theory for years after. Lower middle class, the term used today, but no, they weren't left wanting. Beth Lee's parents were even yet together, an only child, but still, she'd been distant from them most of her life. Although her mother in later interviews insisted she had not been overly maternal with her, as if to even further distance herself from her daughter's heinousness, Beth Lee seemed a prideful child, going off by herself the moment she claimed her general child locomotion. She was always looking at the horizon for what might be better out there, and that was that. The girl was left to her own devices her whole life then. Tara's daddy had died in a construction accident. He'd had seizures, and a bad one, the day he died, and after that her world was shook up. Her mama took to drinking. She never hit Tara, not once, but that's when the neglect set in, ripening her perfectly for the day when Clifford blew into her life and squeezed every last drop of charisma from his glands until she, like Beth Lee, was requitedly his. Here on the road to Roebuck, it was all intended paths, particular homes to visit, incantations and hermetic movements, practiced just right, perfected the weeks prior in Clifford's bunker, what to do and how to do it upon the happenstance of his death. The girls were giggly like soda pop. It was so close. The whole state of Indiana had been on alert for days. Random break-ins, murders with no motive, haphazard crime scenes they were unable to pin on any one person. Drifters, family members, lovers, spurned ex-employees out for revenge. Newspapers ate it up. Local, then national news outlets hovered above the chaos like buzzards. The authorities couldn't, for the life of them, put it together, and the state troopers and the local police hated sharing the workload, but were left with no choice. They did work together, of course, but it was, as things go, a cobweb of misinformation and bureaucracy and slow-moving parts. This we know now, perhaps the prime reason for the girls' evasion, if only commentators and historians and those with perfect recall agree. They'd worked together, shared what they had. The girls would have undoubtedly been seized before the end. But maybe not. Beth Lee was sprightly, bouncy. She'd sooner knock out your teeth than have you talk back to her. And Tara was quiet, thoughtful, and curious. But together they were yet still girls, and no one could truly suspect girls of such horrific feats, of chopped fingers and scalped heads, blistering and festered ruins of home fires, smashed femurs and sawed-off ears. Libby was too young back then to know any of this, and much later would come at this from a lifetime of research and hearsay only, an afforded distance from her childhood, which, yes, she was thankful for. But years later, reading through the articles and the transcripts and the horde of police reports, was it really so unbelievable? Two girls, neither remarkable, neither with a driver's license even, lugging only what they wore and a bizarrely oversized duffel bag it took the two of them to lift and maneuver. And after the fact, after it all, they'd been dubbed the Witches of Kamana County, where the most heinous of their acts had taken place, and the name, cutesy and market research tested, it seemed, stuck. But witches, Libby knows now they were not. Roebuck was a nothing place back then, a backwater flushed against Lake Michigan, a blink-and-you-miss-it village full of bone-tired Studebaker factory workers, of farmers and Lake Michigan fishers, and those few who commuted on occasion to Chicago. Only a sliver of Kamana County touched Lake Michigan, and this seemed to be where the bulk of civilization was. A handful of beach and vacation houses had popped up in the last couple of years, but it would be another decade entirely before the town would be overrun, changed completely to something unrecognizably kitsch. Back then, there was a small grocery that had been anchored there forever, and the owner, Mike Schneider, knew everyone, their tastes and orders and what jokes they responded to, and a county sheriff's outpost and a small library and a single bar paved over now with a natural food store. Roebuck was quiet, and that's how everyone liked it, including the girls. It was isolated like their other pit stops, chosen because of its proximity, its solitude, and for other reasons no one but Clifford ever knew. That night, the night the girls arrived, rain had been predicted over Lake Michigan, a storm of storms, the radio said, but the sky was clear yet by dusk. And there they were, young Libby, 5 going on 6, and her mother, Sylvia, in that small brown house that butted up against that small private beach, a house that had been Sylvia's grandparents, gifted to her upon their death. Here's what Libby knows about her mother. Sylvia was beautiful, a lovely, stern woman. Libby's father had run out on her before Libby was born, and the story goes that Sylvia had said, "Didn't need you anyway," and that was that. She was resolute she'd raise Libby herself on her own, and no one questioned this. She'd put herself through nursing school in Indianapolis, and here in this house she'd grown up in, only yards from the beach she lost her virginity on some hapless fall high school night, on the beach she swore she'd never set foot on again. There'd been a fight between the three of them, Sylvia and her parents, a big one, for reasons Libby's never come to figure out. Sylvia hadn't been back then until their untimely deaths, back only out of a lack of something else to do, this house a smudge on her memory she wished to scrub clean. But all of this, Libby knows, is pieced together through fragmented details, hearsay, her own creativity. She doesn't really know how they got on, if they ever did, why she hated it here. Speculation was all that she had, all that kept her mother alive. All those years after, Libby could never figure out why the girls chose that house, her house. In fact, they had only been weeks away from moving. Sylvia wanted to go to Chicago, find real work, have a real life in the city, and expose Libby to the real world. Roebuck was just a waypoint for them, much like it was for the girls. Maybe sell the house, maybe keep it as a getaway, rent it out when they weren't using it. This, the only question that kept Libby awake yet. If they'd already been in Chicago, gone from this place, if the girls pulled up and found no one home, if they discontinue their parade of death or move on to the house next door, what then? Would they have found someone else, another sacrifice entirely, if that was allowed? Funny in that way. Sylvia, doomed to die here like her parents had, separated only by years, by causes, them, carbon monoxide, her, a single shot fired into the right lung, collapsing it until she slowly suffocated to death. But really, do causes matter? What does it say to die in the exact same place as someone else, no matter how it happens? Libby says now, is that some cosmic joke or what?
Sorry, technical difficulties on my side there.
No worries.
That was fantastic. I love how in your intro you talked about kind of like your Midwesternness, and like it really shines through in that excerpt. Like the Roebuck may be fictional, but if you're from Michigan and driven to Chicago, we all know, like, we know exactly where you're talking about. Like I had the whole picture, like dune grass on one side and a ton of steel on the other, you know, that kind of Midwestern thing that happens on the south end of Lake Michigan there.
Absolutely.
Yeah. And then thank you for correcting me on the Michiganderness. I like that too. Like, yeah, I mean,
okay.
Once a Michigander, always a Michigander, right? Like,
That's right.
It's you know, it's baseball season right now, so I was kind of joking that Michigan's like the farm system for the rest of the country. Like, we get all these great people, bring them up, and then they go off to, you know,
absolutely
other wonderful locales.
Absolutely.
Sort of a thing we do. And I also love, you said it's like a cardinal sin. I love when people read new work. It's sort of like a preview, you know? It's
a
trailer for a movie or something. So
exactly. There you go. I like that. I'm going to use that. I'm going to borrow that.
All right. Well, there you go. It's yours. All right. 2 questions. One, as you mentioned at the beginning, you tend to write short works, novellas and whatnot.
Yep.
And I find I'm kind of a big fan of both. Like in social media, writers often get into arguments, but like short is good, medium's great, long is best. And I kind of find it sort of like the story. It depends on the story and the writer, right? Like different things have different demands. So I'll toss the question to you then. Like, what are the advantages of shorter works, of a novella versus, you know, like a 600-page epic or something along those lines?
Hot seat. Yeah. Okay. I don't want to piss anyone. Well, yeah. I hope not. No, I think I think it takes a deft hand to be able to write a 600-page book and make it affecting by page 500 as it is on page 100. Right. I do not have that skill set. One of the reasons I have kind of really gone short with work in my life, I think has been because I like the pace of it, right? Let's keep it going. I find myself personally, when I have a lull, I feel it. You know, when I was early writing, you know, that really, really famous piece of advice by Elmore Leonard, don't write the parts that you tend to skip, right? Everybody knows that. I really internalized that. And I realized when I was in college and writing like, you know, 70,000 100,000, 150,000 word fantasy novels that I would be reading back through them and be like, what is this? This is so boring, you know, and not realizing too much later that I could keep a pretty quick pace and keep going and sort of just, here comes one, here comes another, here comes another, can sort of keep going that way. I like that. I think it comes down to skill, kind of like you said. I think there are writers who can undeniably hold your attention for a really, really, really long time. And I think I'm not one of them. But I think there's also a benefit to it too. I don't think every story needs to be super long. I think some stories are short. I think that there's some details that it's okay that we don't put in a book, that we fill in ourselves as readers. I mean, Dennis Johnson's Train Dreams is a great example. I know everybody talks about it, but it's a perfection, and it's a perfect example of what a novella does. I mean, it's a decades-long life in this character in 150 pages or something like that, 100 pages. I mean, that's all you need. We can fill in the blanks on everything else, right? And I don't think there's a right way or wrong way, but I think how about this? I wish more stuff was novella length.
Yes.
I think my frustration lies in the fact that I think a lot of people want to write novellas. People like that. And the sort of attitude, I'm being very general here, I know, but the attitude generally in publishing tends to be, can you add more to it? Yeah. Can you make it longer? I've sort of always been of the mindset that if I can write it in 500 words, then I can kind of expand out from that point. And I don't know, I like the exercise of saying, can I contain an entire story in X words? Can I make, a novella, a life's journey in 100 pages? Like that's a fun exercise for me too. So
I love
long-winded roundabout, but
no, I love that. And I love that you brought up kind of the craft side of it, because I think there's a lot to that. It's like, I tend to write more poetry. I write some fiction too, but like it's the whole point of like a sonnet or a villanelle or something. Like it forces you to,
right,
jam the language into a certain set, and that creates some fun too. It's a bit of a challenge.
Yeah.
And most of my working career has been as a high school English teacher, so I've had to teach mice and men a number of times.
Oh yeah.
I often find myself like, because 14-year-olds, 15-year-olds, they want to get into the story, and I'm always catching myself in like a craft lecture about like, look at how he got all this into 107 pages, and like they don't care about that. They just care about like George and Lenny. I'm like, oh,
right, exactly.
Gotta stop talking craft here. No, I love that answer. I think that's great, and I agree. I wish the publishing industry was more into novellas in general.
Yeah.
Even if you had to, like, we're here in Michigan, Jim Harrison, of course, is like a native son of Michigan. The whole like 3 novellas in one. Like, even if you have to get creative with
absolutely
packaging and the presentation of novellas, like just give us more novellas. It's an underserved, underrepresented art form, I think. So thanks.
And I hate to say it, but I think a lot of it is I think from their end, they think it's the cost. Like if they want to charge, and the book's only 100 pages, are people going to want to pay what they want to charge for something like that, right? And it becomes a whole thing at that point.
Yeah.
But not my rules. So
yeah. I'm not saying it's not a complex problem. I just wish
it's a very complex problem. Yeah. But the TLDR version, I wish there was more novellas.
Yeah. Ditto.
There you go.
Ditto. And I love long books too. Like I have a theory that, like you said, you couldn't write a long book. I'm sure you could. You're a marvelous writer. I love your work.
Oh, thank you. But
I think it's more like what's the story, and like we all have our comfort zones in the areas that we like to work in. But I think a lot of it is like, what does the story demand? Like if it's a story that ultimately is like 3 stories in one or 4 stories in one, like revolving around each other, you're going to have a longer book.
Absolutely. Yeah.
And the Elmore Leonard stuff, like I'm trying to work on a piece of fiction myself right now, and I keep finding myself like I'll go back and reread 10 pages and be like, I need to add, like, there's no description here. It's all dialogue. Like,
right.
You can tell I read some Elmore Leonard in my.
That's right. It's not a bad thing though. Not a bad thing.
I hope not.
No way.
Fingers crossed.
That's right.
So I actually, coming into this show tonight, so we're recording this. Who knows? By the time this airs, God knows the world could be 100% different. But as we read this, we're still in the middle of, well, here in Michigan, we're in the middle of a crazy COVID flare up.
Sorry to hear that.
And so I caught myself earlier today daydreaming about, like, what could you do? And I'm a fan of the road trip. And early in your reading, you actually mentioned the phrase a road trip of brutality, and that really caught my attention. So your second question is not going to be about brutality. I guess it can if you want. That's up to you.
No, thank you.
So I'm gonna go back just to the road trip part. So if all things being equal, you could take a road trip to anywhere right now. What's your road trip? Where would you go? What's your destination? What's your goal? What kind of road trip could you take? Would you take right now if you could take one right now?
Okay, I'm gonna put a twist on this answer. My wife and I just got our second dose of the vaccine, and to celebrate, we decided we need to do something. We have to, right? As everybody is kind of collectively saying, and we booked an Amtrak trip to Lake Tahoe, because the Amtrak station in Lincoln is like a block from where we live, which is fantastic, and that's going to be, I mean, I'll call that a road trip of some kind, right? There's wheels on a train. And that is going to hit everything I want to see. Like, I love road tripping out west. The last road trip we did was New Mexico, and I was lying. Everything that happened was so perfect. It was like I was lying. We were driving by the Spanish Peaks. No one was around us. We had to stop on the road because there was wild horses on the road. Like, come on, right? Like, I'm like, is this really happening to me and stuff like that? Yeah. I crave kind of going out west. I love the West. The Tahoe trip, I think, is going to be really special. If that's my official answer. Sorry, my headphone. Technical issues. Yeah. That's my official answer, but I would say outside of that, I would love to drive back to New Mexico. Love that road trip.
Yeah, I'm very jealous. I've never been to New Mexico. It's one of the areas I'd love to get to.
Should
have for decades now. I've wanted to get there, so
it's a really it's always been sort of this haven for artists. And last time we went to Taos, which is like a haven for painters and visual artists and stuff like that. And that was our first time there. And you go there, and you're like, oh, okay, I get it. Like, this is so special. Like, it's just a really, really magical place. And then
I've heard that about it.
Yeah, it's really fantastic. So I hope you can get there someday.
Someday, yeah. I mean, fingers crossed. I mean, I also love the West. We have family in Colorado, and I just
nice.
For the mountains. It's been too long since I've been in mountains already, and I've never really been in dry mountains. It's like Montana, Colorado, like those stretches I've been in. So I really would love to get down farther south. It's high on the to-do list, or at least the other side. Like, we've hit Denver a number of times. Like,
right.
To drive across mountains instead of just up into them. Yeah, I have 1,000 road trip ideas.
So do I.
Who can't sit in the car for that long? So,
that's fair. Yeah. That's totally fair.
Yeah. All right. Well, Robert James Russell, thank you again for joining us tonight.
Thank you for having me.
And viewers, check out his work online and books, and the literary magazines he edits as well are fantastic. So there you go. Thank you for joining us at Wednesday Night Sessions. And again, Rob, thanks for joining us tonight.
Thanks for having me. Thanks, everyone.
We'll see you next time, everybody.